Good evening.
Good evening.
You know, I don't know where my phone is. Oh, I do know where my phone is. It's back here. No, it wouldn't do any good. I got the volume turned down, you know, like you're supposed to do in church.
We're supposed to do the phone. Where are you?
You're supposed to turn your phone down. I only do this. I only want my phone so that I can see if people are.
Mine's out in the truck charging, and now I see I can take pictures, but now it's not here.
All right. All right. Everybody ready to get started?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Some have been asking. Let me fill you in real quick. Some have been asking me about Dad. Dad is doing better. I'll be honest, part of the trip down there, I got a little frustrated with some things. We went to one place that's supposed to be urgent care. They don't behave like urgent care. Turn myself down there. Then they sent us to another place to get something done, and that place said, why did they send you here? We don't do that here. So we finally ended up at the right place in Albuquerque. And we were there a long time, and they finally got Dad back, started doing what they needed to do. Dad kicked me out about 10:30 that night, said get to the house, clear out the bed. Happened to be my old bed. My old twin bed. It's not the same mattress I had when I was growing up. It didn't feel right.
Yeah, I wonder why.
It was too small,
Uh-huh.
and it was too empty. We'll just leave it at that. And so the next morning I called there because they talked and said they would get a room lined up at the main hospital and they'd have the ambulance get him over there. And the one that took care of him that night, the nurse practitioner, her team boy, they did a great job, but the nurse practitioner was just laying it on thick about this problem, that probably could lead to this, lead to that. So Dad calls me the next morning. I said, where are you at, Dad? He goes, right where you left me. I was not a happy man. But when I got up there, it all worked out. I went, got Dad some breakfast. He hadn't eaten since the previous morning. He could have, but he turned it down. So I went in, and just after when I got there, the nurse had just walked out, and he says, well, the nurse says the doctor is wanting to know if I'm comfortable with what they've done going home like this and following up with the specialist. And he said, absolutely. Then the doctor came in, checked things over. I said, what about all this that they were so worried about last night? He goes, all right. He tells the nurse, take blood, run it through the lab right quick. Came back, says, everything's fine, it's normal. If your dad's comfortable going home, follow up in a few days. So if you will, keep her in prayer. I will be on the road at some point, probably next week again when he gets an appointment set up. Unfortunately, the church board still won't buy me my own personal helicopter to make these trips a little faster. But anyway, thank you to everybody for praying for Dad. It's just a situation as a man gets older that he has to deal with sometimes. But overall, he's doing good. Huh? Yeah, the truth is at 81, Dad, I'll tell you what, we saw people in there, men that I knew were younger than my dad, that were in much worse shape, health-wise than my dad is. So. Trina is in the hospital. Her toe and leg. Oh, my water is up here. I got it. Never mind. It's just, I ran into this thing once in this afternoon already. Don't laugh at me. I'm a tired little man. This wasn't hanging on. It was just the cord. Okay. No, come back right here. Anyway, I talked to Trina this morning. I will check on her tomorrow and try to go see her early, because I've got the doctor's appointment down here tomorrow. Let's keep her in prayer. The toe and leg is infected, and there's some issues going on there with that. So we need to pray for healing, but also at the same time pray that the doctors will have some wisdom to figure out what is going on. That seems to be the big issue. They are.
Is she diabetic?
They're stumped.
Yeah. She says her blood tests come back all good. So
Yeah, that's the thing. Everything they test comes back that it's not pointing to anything they can do. So Let's keep in prayer. I mentioned, I believe, on Sunday about a pastor friend of mine that has been dealing with depression. He called me on my trip home yesterday, and I found out he had been in the hospital himself for a couple of days with some issues. Just keep this pastor friend of mine in prayer, and again, and like I've asked, keep the pastor in prayer. And I'll have the wisdom to know what to say, when to say it, and when to keep my mouth shut. And that's the hardest part.
That's,
Now that was a chance for a really quick, cheap amen from most of you. You missed it, so anyway. Any other praise reports?
I have
Yes.
one, two.
Okay, hold on. We got one over here first. And then you.
Just got the results from her nerve study. And they said there's, even though she still has numbness and tingling and stuff, they said there's no permanent nerve damage, and there's not even been pinched.
Praise God.
All right.
Because that's been,
But still possibly some surgery pending to. Okay. All right. Praise God. Eloy?
I went to the doctor on mine, and they didn't find nothing on my leg either. I'm still hurting, but they're still working to see what it is.
Okay.
And I still need prayer.
Any other praise reports?
Praise the Lord, I finally got my, medical thing straightened out, and it's okay now.
All right. Good. Good. I'll tell you how crazy this is getting. There is a friend of mine and my dad's, lives on my dad's street. He's lived there since he was a kid. He's just older than I am. He's going next month for an exam and all with the eye doctors to see if he has cataracts, which we know he does because like at night now, he doesn't see 2 headlights, he sees 4. They tend to drift. But he had to sit this in. He's been waiting for this appointment for 8 months.
Wow.
We need to be in prayer that they'll get some of this kind of stuff straightened out because it's just, yeah, not good.
Mhm.
Yes. Any other praise reports?
Praise God for the rain.
yes.
Oh, that reminds me the other part of my praise report on this. Monday, I had really hoped that I'd go down, get Dad, we'd go to the urgent care there in his town in Berlin. They would put him on some meds, do a little bit, and we'd be done. I'd take him home, make sure he's comfortable, and then I would head home. Well, I'm glad that God didn't let it work out that way. How many of you saw what happened in Las Vegas on Monday?
Oh, yeah.
They had such a hailstorm that it was flooding streets, and they had to pull out the snow plows to clear the hail off the interstate.
Wow.
I heard that it's in this.
And then, about the time how I left when I thought maybe I was going to get to, I would have hit the Colfax Union County line during the middle of a tornado warning. So I went, well, okay, I guess it didn't hurt for me to spend the night.
Praise God.
Wow.
So, even sometimes when we get frustrated and don't like the way things are going, understand God has it in control.
Yes, He does.
He sees the big picture, and we see one little tiny sliver of what's going on.
Pinhole.
Huh?
A pinhole.
A pinhole, yes. Anybody else? All right, prayer requests.
Jimmy's sister, Julia, she's from Plainview, and she's been very sick, very sick. But,
Okay.
for him to get out there, he just doesn't really know the direction. Pray for him.
Okay, keep them in prayer. Others?
Pray for our Montana crew.
Your Montana crew,
Our Montana crew.
how's the job going?
Great.
All right. That's right up Matt's alley. He's getting plenty of the dirt some more.
He has played the dirt since he was
With-
big enough to get in dirt.
But now it's with bigger toys than ever.
Bigger toys, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Any other prayer requests?
Not that I can do that.
Huh?
I have another one. My sister Teresa, she's having problems with her knee again too.
Okay.
And need special prayer for her too.
All right. Definitely keep Treva in prayer.
How's Doug Dino?
I saw him drive by once or twice, and that's been about it. And unfortunately, Even trying to, a lot of times trying to call and text him, he's busy and doesn't respond. So keep him in prayer.
We'll be doing lots of traffic.
Huh?
Driving. Lots of driving.
Lots of driving?
Lots of driving. California.
Oh, you guys are, yeah, when?
We leave Friday morning.
Already?
Already?
Really?
How long are y'all gonna be here?
Wow.
We'll be back to the 16th.
Well,
We'll miss 2 Sundays.
all right, I guess we'll let you go. 2 weeks. Be back, we said 16. Well, I guess we'll let you go. Enjoy. Are y'all going down and catching up with the kids in the cross, or?
Yeah, Chris is a family staying with us.
Okay,
So we're picking up goats, going to her house and
picking up goats.
goats. 'Cause
And then taking
it's
to-
time for them to be getting goats.
Oh, my.
It's very vexatious.
Oh, all kinds of fun.
Wow.
Any others?
Keep Lois and her family in prayer. Yes. Safe travel.
Yes, that's what she's asking for, yes.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna ask my wife to open the prayer.
Precious Heavenly Father, we come before you with praise and thanksgiving, Lord God, that we could come here tonight. We could study your word, Lord God. I pray that you'd open up your word, open up our hearts so that we receive your word, Father God. And Lord, I pray for these requests, Lord God. I pray for each and every one. You know each and every one. I pray that you would just meet the needs there, Father God, in your perfect timing. And we trust in you. We trust you to do your work in your perfect timing. And help us to be patient with you, Lord God. In that precious name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. One other I forgot to tell you about, we have requested prayer for Justin and Marissa this time, Michael and Caitlin's co-workers down there. I don't have any details, but they did have their baby girl. So, that means,
I had her little boy too.
who?
Yes, Krista.
Oh, she did, yes, that's right. Yes, Chris is, yes. All right.
Well,
Well-
pray for Marissa, because she had a pretty rough pregnancy.
She did, yeah.
And just pray that her body will heal and
Yeah,
she'll
do
do
better.
great.
I think what's gonna be fun is that the two couples down there that have the babies are gonna have some, they're gonna have on their team some built-in babysitters maybe.
Yes.
Michael and Caitlin see can get some practice before they decide to have them. All right, got your study notes together? Here we go. Abraham's later life until his death. And tonight you're going to notice that we're going to cover a lot more chapters in the Bible than normal, but a much shorter time frame. In the first 15 chapters of Genesis, we have covered thousands of years. Tonight we take chapters 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and part of 25. 9.5 chapters. That's only 75 years. The time frame slows down. So, settle in. I'm going to read all 9.5 chapters to... No, I'm not.
I've got it on my now.
I could read it to you like I have heard a few speakers in my life. I could read it to you like this in a monotone. All right, what I'm giving you tonight is kind of what we're going to sort of, part of the time you're going to simply a chart or listing of information and giving you some dates, and then just, again, I want you to gain a better understanding of God's Word as it fits into the overall history that was going on around the world at that time, the things. There's a couple of things in here that I think I briefly mentioned before, but I hope that it will kind of blow your mind. Now, on this time chart, I decided to put it up because we have it. I just want you to know, I want to show you exactly. We started here, and we're already, you ready for this? We are already here.
Wow.
Now, the thing is, the time frame from here to here on this chart is greater in the amount of time covered than from here to where we've stopped it. Again, the first several chapters of Genesis covers this massive amount of time. There's not a lot of detail. And if you go to the historians, guess what? They're guessing about a lot of this themselves because they don't want to acknowledge the Word of God. And as a matter of fact, today, what we're going to look at, I actually, looking at the historical side of it, literally found where it says, well, we know that the Hebrew Bible says this about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and blah, 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 and Ishmael. But most historians consider all that to be mythological anyway. Well, they're a loss. All right. Let's go through. There are going to be some pictures I will put on the slides that I did not print out for you because I did not really think I wanted to use that much color ink. Okay? But just a few, we'll get to them. All right, let's start here. Starting in Genesis 16, on this chart I give you the event, I give you the Genesis chapter or chapters, and I give you the approximate years in which it happened. So we begin in chapter 16. Okay, remember last time Abraham took his men, he went and rescued Lot, defeated the kings, comes back, God does the blood covenant with him, changes his name, changes Sarah's name, and right after that, good old Sarah comes up to Abraham and she says, hey old man, you're supposed to be having a son and I'm getting too old. I got this great idea. My young maid there is pretty attractive and I think maybe you should just make her a second wife and have a kid by her. How many of you women think that would be a good idea? No. If my wife ever made me an offer like that, we'd be taking her to the loony bin because I know she'd be off her rocker. You know, so Abraham makes Hagar a secondary wife, a second wife. He has a child by her, and that child's name is Ishmael. Chapters 16 and 17 talks about the birth of Ishmael, and he grows up to be, through that chapter, into his teenage years. That happens somewhere around the years 2080 to 2066 BC. Let me remind you, BC, before Christ, the bigger the number, the further back in time it is, because we're counting backwards from Christ, okay? Then we move along, and in chapters 18 and 19, Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. How many remember that story of how that came about? Who shows up to talk to Abraham face to face? How many people? Three. Who are they?
Angels.
Two are angels. One, it says, is the angel of the Lord. When you see that phrase in the Old Testament, it is a theophany of Christ. A theophany means an appearance of God in human form. So you see, Jesus didn't begin in Bethlehem. He's eternal, like the Father and His Holy Spirit. And at various times in the Old Testament, when it says an angel of the Lord, it's an angel. When it says the angel of the Lord, it is Jesus in human form making a momentary, temporary appearance to somebody. The three come, and remember the story? Moses immediately recognizes who his guests are, so he tells Sarah and the ones in the kitchen, start fixing something for these men, we're going to feed them. They sit and they talk, and we find out that God considers Abraham such a friend that he basically says, how can I possibly bring judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah for their evil and their wickedness without first letting Abraham know what I'm going to do? Why was it important for Abraham to know what was going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah? Lot was living there. His nephew was there. His nephew's family was there. All right? And of course, you can go back and read. I'm not going to give you that whole thing where they talk and Abraham says, God, hey, if I can find so many righteous people, will you save the city? And he haggles with God. Have you ever haggled with God?
No.
We've all haggled with God at some point.
Yeah.
Oh God, if you'll just let me pass this test, even though I didn't study, I promise I'll be nicer to Mom.
Well,
Am I right? At
Yeah.
some point in our lives, we've haggled with God. Thing is, God didn't get mad. He told Abraham, he says, you know what? You find even just 10 people that are righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'll spare the city. Now get this, Lot was living there with his wife, and he has 4 daughters, and 2 sons-in-law. So let's see, that's 4, 5, 6, that's 8 of them right there. Could not find even 2 other people that could be considered righteous. So they're destroyed. Chapter 19, the story continues. Sometime around 2067, 2066 BC, does God warn Lot personally? Yes. Who does he send?
The same.
He sends 2 angels. 2 angels show up. The men of the city see the strangers. They want to do unspeakable things. Lot brings them into his house. Lot even offers to let the men of the city have his daughters. Now, we don't understand that, but in that culture, you've got to understand hospitality and protection of a stranger was one of the highest virtues you can exhibit. And about the time the men are going to attack Lot, the angels grab Lot, pull him back in, and blind the men of the city. Tells Lot, you need to get up and get out of here. Who leaves with Lot?
His wife and daughter.
His wife and 2 of his daughters. The 2 married daughters and their husbands remained in the city. What happens to Lot's wife?
She turns to salt.
To this very day, by the Dead Sea, on the far right of this picture, you see a pillar of salt known, it has been known throughout all time since ancient time as Lot's wife. It is near the Dead Sea. Is that actually Lot's wife and the salt is accumulated? I don't know, but I do believe that when the Bible says Lot's wife turned to a pillar of salt, I believe she literally turned to a pillar of salt. Why? That's a strange punishment for God to do, but what do you think everybody for the next many decades that walked by there and saw that, what do you think it did for them?
Reminded them of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah and how she disobeyed what God said.
Let me tell you something. The lesson for us today is not that you might turn to a pillar of salt, but the lesson for us today is that when God has told you to leave something behind, leave it. Remember, we did a whole many months out of the book of Hebrews, and what was the title of that series?
What is ahead?
What's ahead is better than what's behind.
yes.
Lot's wife didn't remember that. Lot and his daughters take off, hide in the mountains, and sometime during all of this, the 2 daughters get it in their heads that Daddy's not going to let us marry any of the men we want, but we need to keep Daddy's name alive, so they commit incest with their father, and the sons that are born to the 2 daughters, eventually their descendants become the Moabites and the Ammonites. And we'll talk about them briefly in the world history section tonight. Genesis chapter 20, Abraham moves from the Negev to Kadesh and Shur into that region. In that region there is a king by the name of Abimelech, the king of Gerar. And when King Gerar, Abimelech, comes and sees them, who does he see and think is still really attractive? Sarah. What does Abraham, the great man of faith, do again?
He tells her,
He-
he tells him she's his sister.
He gives the half-truth again of, this is my sister. Abimelech says, great, I like the way she looks, I'll take her for one of my wives. God warns him, and Abimelech gives Abraham the same thing Pharaoh did. He says, why did you lie to me? And good old Abraham, the father of faith, says, I was afraid you'd kill me. Look, if Abraham struggled with repeating the same wrong thing a second time, don't use it as an excuse when you do, but know you're in good company. Aren't you glad that God doesn't just say, Joyce, you blew it once, lightning bolt, boom, you're gone. Crispy critter, right? No, he doesn't. He gives us opportunities. Huh?
A righteous man falls 7 times, but gets back up.
Yeah, a righteous man may fall 7 times, but he'll get right back up. Of course, the same goes for a woman too. We're like, how many of you with your kids and they're growing up have those little toys called the Weebles?
Oh, yeah.
What was the theme of them? What was the slogan? Weebles wobble, but we don't fall down. So, you know, that's sometimes how we gotta live our life, right? All right, chapter 21, Isaac is born in about 2066 BC. Also in that chapter, Ishmael grows up. And he and his mother Hagar are sent away by Abraham. Sarah realized that she'd made a mistake. But how many of you know that sometimes when we make a mistake, we need to own up to it, not try to cover it up or sweep it under the rug?
Yeah,
What happens if you keep sweeping your mistakes under the rug?
you keep facing it.
You pass it down.
You end up with a very lumpy rug.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, it gets passed on to somebody else to take care of, whether it be your friends, your family, your kids. Look, if you made a mistake, you need to own up to it and take care of it. Sarah should have went and told Abraham, you know what, I was wrong. I'm sorry, husband, forgive me. That was the wrong solution. And then she especially should have went to God. And then she should have went to Hagar and said, look, I should never put you in this position. But did Hagar behave properly? How did Hagar behave whenever she found out she was pregnant?
She got very upset.
Huh?
Rubbed it in Sarah's face.
Yeah, it says she despised her mistress Sarah. Mistress being the feminine form of master, okay? It says she despised her. All of a sudden Hagar was looking at Sarah going, well, old lady, I'm the one with child and not you. Well, we know that they were sent away, but God took care of Ishmael. God told Abraham, he says, Isaac is the son of promise. But I will make Ishmael into the father of many nations as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. Also in chapter 21, Abraham now makes a treaty with King Abimelech, the king of Gerar. Abimelech comes to him and says, look, you're a mighty man. You are extending. I don't want trouble with you ever again. Let's make a treaty and let's be friends. And that happens somewhere between 2066 and 2052 BC, sometime during those growing up years of Ishmael and the early years of Isaac. Chapter 22, Abraham is tested with the sacrificing of Isaac. That happens somewhere between Isaac's birth until around 2052 and 2029. You say, how do you know that? Well, the next thing that comes up in the next chapter, in 2029 BC approximately, Sarah dies at the age of 127, and Abraham being told to go and sacrifice Isaac happens before Sarah dies. So when we talk about how old was Isaac when this happened, I had not pieced this together till now, but he had to be 27 years of age or younger, because he was 27 when his mother, 37 or younger, because he was 37 when she died, because she's 127 when she died. How old was she when she had him? 90. So he's somewhere between childhood and 37 years old, which goes back to what I think Paul is the one that told me this, that the rabbis think he might have been, you said, huh? Around 37. Okay. Or just a touch younger. Okay? So now we know he's somewhere in that age range. We don't know exactly, but it was before his mother dies. Wow.
So he trusted God.
Oh,
He trusted Abraham.
I've always known that he was old enough that had he wanted to break away from his dad, he could have, okay? You gotta remember, how did the Jews through the years, how did they always refer to God? He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Isaac had a trust and faith in God, brought him. I'm sure as he grew up, Mama Sarah and Daddy Abraham probably told him the story over and over. You are the son of promise. Yes, we're older than all of the parents of your Little League teammates. We get that, but there's a reason why. My wife and I have laughed about that for years with our boys in basketball and Little League. Literally, some of their teammates' parents were young enough that they could have been our kids, okay? See, we're older than you thought, huh?
I'm just, my oldest brother is 11 years older than me, so my parents were older than my classmates' parents.
Okay, so you,
Oh,
okay, you're on the other side.
Yeah.
Well, Caitlin's parents are about the same age as my oldest son, Richard.
oh, wow.
Okay. So Abraham is tested with the sacrificing of Isaac, and we know how that turns out. God stops him, provides the ram. Chapter 23 in Genesis begins, and Sarah dies at the age of 127 in about 2029 BC. Now let's go next page. When she dies in chapter 23, we're told that Abraham goes to the Hittites, and he says to them, and this is how they transact the business. The men come together, and he says, he doesn't talk to the man directly. He says to the leaders and the elders of this Hittite community, he says, look, I want you to, on my behalf, now the man is sitting right there, okay? He says, on my behalf, would you please put in a good word for me with Ephron, your fellow Hittite? I want to buy from him the cave of Machpelah so that I can have a place to bury my wife. Now I want you to, I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute, but I want you to stop for a minute. God has promised Abraham what about this land in which he's traversing?
It's gonna be his one day.
It's going to be his. It's going to be his. How much of it before this chapter does Abraham own?
None.
Not one speck of dust does he own. Everywhere he goes, he is dependent upon the generosity of people in that region, letting him stay where he's at. Abraham, this will be all yours. But right now, he doesn't have a title deed to anything. Well, Ephron says, look, what is money between me and you? Go bury your dead. Now, he's not saying I want to give it to you. He's telling Abraham, look, right now, you need to bury your wife. We'll discuss money later. Abraham says, no. Takes out the checkbook. I like him on just like that. And he says, I'm going to write the check right now because I don't want there to be any question about the validity of this. I'm writing you the check, signing it now in front of the elders of the community. That's how they did business. Writes it down. I want you to understand this. The day Abraham died, there was still the promise that all of this would be his and his descendants. But the day he died, the only thing Abraham owned was a cemetery. What do you think about that? I got some pictures. 2 slides worth. You're going to love this. On the left is a building built by Herod, King Herod. Go to the end of the Old Testament, begin time, that 400 years or so, New Testament time, the present one. That is one of the few remaining buildings built by Herod that is still intact. That building is a large, partly mosque, partly temple, partly church, partly tourist, and it covers the cave of Machpelah. You see on the right a picture, that is one of 2 entrances into the cave of Machpelah. It is the difficult access, very difficult to get into the cave. The cave has 2 levels, a higher level, a lower level. If you go over there to the Holy Land, this is in Hebron, about 19 miles south of Jerusalem, no, you cannot go into that cave. You can go into that building. But what you're going to find in that building, on the left, is the more visible known entrance to the cave. There's only one other known entrance, which is less accessible. Out of respect to the dead, access to the actual tombs down in the cave, underground, is prevented. There is also this. The Muslims have some control over this, the Jews have some control over this, and a few others have some control over this. If what I read is up to date, the Jews are allowed to enter from only one side of the building, and they only have access to a small part of it. Muslims have to enter from the other side, but they can wander around the whole thing. If we went over there as tourists, I'm not sure how much we'd be allowed to see. What you see on the right is one of the 4 cenotaphs in the building. It was constructed by Herod. There is one of these each for Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Leah. A cenotaph, just so you'll know, I had to look it up, is an empty tomb or a monument erected in honor of a person, whose remains are elsewhere. Those are not what they are buried in. Their bodies, if they've got the right caves, and I tend to think they're pretty close, are down in the caves below where you're not allowed to go. These 4 of these have been built to honor the fact that they are there. All right? Something interesting I want to point out, and this will come up later, but I'll point it out right now since we're talking about this, because we're not going to go this far into the story in Genesis today. When Isaac first got ready to get married, who did he want to marry?
Rachel. Oh, Rebecca.
You know, they put Isaac and Leah. That's not right.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Not?
That's Jacob and Leah. You know what? I copied and pasted that off of the site, and they are wrong. That should be Isaac and Rebecca. Okay? But there are some that think Jacob and Leah may be buried in that tomb as well. There's also some tradition that says Adam and Eve are buried there. I'm not so sure about that one. Sorry about that. Good thing it's not in your notes, don't you? There are at least 4 of these cenotaphs, excuse me. Cenotaphs. Well, I can't hardly see that. One for Abraham, Sarah, one for Isaac, and it's one for Rachel. But if you read through the Bible, you'll find that later on, Jacob and Leah are buried in that same cave. Now, what's unique there is when Jacob goes to get married, who does he want to marry? Rachel. Why Rachel? She's the cute one. But she's also the baby. And in a lot of cultures, now you may think this is ancient stuff, let me tell you, I had a family in my home church that when the middle daughter ended up getting married before the older daughter, the family flipped. Sad part is the marriage didn't last. And finally, the baby daughter, there's 3 daughters, the baby daughter ended up getting married as well, and that marriage has lasted. The older daughter, I don't think ever got married. But it's interesting that when it came time and when they passed, Rachel, and we'll see this, you see this later on, Rachel is buried somewhere far away from this cave. And when it came time for when Leah died, Jacob had her buried in the cave with his grandparents and his parents, and he was buried there as well. Okay, I know this is a sidetrack, but let me tell you, sometimes when you think you know what you want and God gives you something that you don't think you want, you find out over the course of time that God is right, and you end up loving what He gave you more than what you pursued. All right. Chapter 24, Isaac marries Rebecca, the granddaughter of Abraham's brother Nahor, around 2026 BC. You can read that story. Oh, you ladies, how many of you ladies like love stories, romance stories? Come on. All right, let me put it this way. Let's put Mark. How many of you ladies love the Hallmark Channel?
Yes. Yeah. Happy Saturday.
Happy sappy movies. You like what?
Rom-coms.
Rom-com. Well, that's basically what Hallmark puts out, sort of. I mean,
They're just cheesy.
what? What has 3 plot lines and 50 actors and actresses? The Hallmark Channel. What a story. Abraham goes to his servant. Sarah has died. Isaac is mourning the loss of his mother. Abraham goes to his most trusted servant. He says, look, I got a job for you. You gotta go find my son a wife. I don't want him marrying any of these pagans which we live amongst. You go back to where I came from. You go back to what? Not Ur,
No.
where they moved when they left Ur. The place that was named after Abram's brother.
Hebron.
Not Nahor, but go back to Nahor's house with the town. Huh? Haran. Thank you.
There you go.
Haran. Go back to my people in Haran, and you find my son a wife from our people. Now, a lot of people today would immediately say, well, Abraham apparently was what? Racist. It wasn't about race. It wasn't about ethnicity. They lived among a people who were pagan and polytheistic that did not serve the one true God. They served many gods. And he said, look, I don't want my son marrying into that. Because what usually happens when the believer hooks up with the non-believer?
They become a non-believer.
We always talk about the believer will pull the non-believer up. It doesn't work that way most of the time. Usually it works the other way. I as a youth pastor, you know what I used to tell my young people I better not hear them doing? Missionary dating. Some of them. Oh, but pastor. And I hate to say it, the girls were worse than but pastor, if I go out with him and I'm his girlfriend, I'll get him to do better.
Oh, no.
No, never mind.
Didn't work that way most of the time. I never say never, except I never say never. But most of the time, it didn't work that way. Abraham's not being racist. He's being a good spiritual man about this. I want the right kind of woman for my son that will worship the one true God with him. Read the story. The servant goes back. Rebecca comes out, he says, can I have a drink? She says, I'll tell you what, I'll get you a drink and I'll water the camels. And there's this whole thing. He goes and meets the family. They're surprised to hear that it's Abraham and that he's alive, that he's wealthy, doing well. And, anyway, she goes back. They fall in love, and it's a great love story. You can read it for yourself. He doesn't like love stories either. Oh. It's getting late. We'll hurry. All right, chapter 25 moves on through the story. Isaac is now married. Abraham marries Keturah. They have 6 sons who are the descendants, and their descendants become some of the people groups like the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Luamites. This happens between the years of 2015 and 1991 BC. You say, Pastor, how do you know it stopped in 1991 BC? Because later in that chapter, Abraham dies at the age of 175. A lot going on in that family during that 75 years, wouldn't you say? Isn't it interesting? Have you ever thought about the fact that if you go back down your family tree and think about your siblings and your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your grandpas, you know, you can trace it back, and I'm not talking about going back just to Noah, but do you realize that it all kind of goes back to that one person who kind of started it for you? Here we find Ishmael had 12 sons, and they became, we're going to talk about them briefly in a moment, they became tribes and nations. Abraham, of course, has Isaac, and he has the 12 sons that we'll talk about in a week or two, and they become the nation of Israel. But here, these other 6 sons that Abraham has at his really old age, they become the founding members of other tribes and people groups as well. What did Abraham leave to these other 6 sons? What did he leave to them when he died? What was in his will for them? Nothing. It says before he died, he gave gifts to those 6 sons and sent them on their way. And all that he had, all this that we talked about that he's accumulated, all this wealth, he didn't even give it to Ishmael. It goes to Isaac, the son of promise. Now we do find that when he died, by this time, Isaac and Ishmael apparently had reconciled as brothers, because they come together and they do the right thing, and they take and bury their father in the cave of Machpelah, right alongside Sarah. Now, world history account. This won't take long, but there's a lot that's going on around the world during this entire time frame. All of the years that are shown in this chart are approximate, okay? Number one thing listed, the city of Ur falls, and the dynasty that Ur was over falls in 2004 BC. Why is that important?
Well, that's where he originates.
Oh, during his lifetime, and I'm sure he eventually heard about, during his lifetime, Abraham gets the news, your old hometown has been destroyed. It's no longer that prosperous place it was when you left there. How many of you have a place that you spent the majority of your growing up years in? How many of you moved around a lot? Okay. Abraham grew up in Ur, spent a lot of time in Haran. Now he's been on this journey through this land all these years. Think about it. He dies at the age of 175. How many years did he spend from the time he left Haran till he died?
Right.
100 years. They left Haran when he was about 75. For 100 years, Abraham wanders through what we call the Promised Land, the land of Canaan, and after 100 years of being there, all he owns is a cave and some trees around it. So that's part of the story we don't think about. From the time he left Haran till he dies, 100 years. And all that God has given him of the promise, of everything he was promised, the only thing that he's actually been given is the son, not the land. Not even the descendants yet. All right, another thing that's happening during this time frame of world history, from 2000 BC all the way up to 1200 BC, and so it starts during Abraham's lifetime, the Hittites, the Indo-European tribes, and Asia Minor form a single kingdom. If you go back and study history, there has always been this tendency to try to enlarge what we call ours. What did God do at the Tower of Babel when man wanted to stay in one
He
place?
confused the language.
He scattered them. But what do men tend to keep doing? We keep trying to do what?
Together.
Come back together. All right. Now this is one that I really wish some of our young people were here to hear this. Because also around 2000 BC, the Babylonians began to use geometry. You all thought it was all new. Can I just tell you, please don't ever again use the phrase new math. What they've been teaching in school that somehow got labeled new math is not new. It has been around for centuries. Geometry is not new. Trigonometry is not new. Calculus is not new. It's a higher form of math that most of us don't want to mess with, but it's not new. In 2000 BC, the Babylonians were using geometry for astronomical measurements and began to identify the signs of the zodiac. Now,
I saw something interesting this week about the Pythagoras theorem.
yes,
There's another group that had been using it in Mesopotamia 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born.
right, and I saw where they found something where a group, an older people group like that, was using some forms of trigonometry that everybody thought had been discovered by the Greeks. And there was another people group, come to find out, they've been using it long before the Greeks or even the people group,
Yeah.
okay?
So who discovered the cornet?
Oh, there you go, Tom.
Adam and Eve.
Oh.
Okay, see, I understand, folks, remember what I've been telling you all through this? I do not believe that mankind intellectually has been evolving. I believe we have been devolving. Yes, we have more technology, but I'm not sure that makes us more intelligent. All right, also around 2000 BC in India, they began to identify things as being made up of some combination of the four basic elements. What did ancient man consider to be the four basic elements? They're written there if you want to read them. Earth, air, fire, and water. They felt that everything around them was made up of some combination of those four things. Now, we of course know now, as mankind became more inquisitive, and we found out that there's a whole bunch of elements. Where can you learn about the elements? What can you use to study the elements if you want to know about them? There's a thing called what?
Chemistry.
Huh? It's a little thing called the periodic table. Yeah, you should remember that, you nursing students.
I don't know anything.
Okay, you got the periodic table and it lists all the different elements. Hydrogen, oxygen, silver, gold, copper, tin, all of these things. They've even created a few in the laboratory that's made on the chart. I won't give you a chemistry lesson tonight. Next week, come ready to learn stoichiometry.
That's why I'm not a pharmacist.
What was real interesting was I loved chemistry when I had it in high school. Didn't care for it in college. Loved the lectures, didn't like the lab. That had something to do with the lab tech. But when my wife was in nursing school, she had to take chemistry, and all of a sudden, stoichiometry is a special form of mathematics related to chemistry. And she had to, so she's like, okay, you're the math whiz in the family, help me with this. I hadn't looked and touched any of that in like 35 years.
I took a 0 in the whole chemistry unit. Because I couldn't do it.
I'll tell you the most fun I ever had with chemistry was my lectures at the University of Mexico. It was in a big lecture hall, there was 450 of us, and I don't remember his name, but the professor was really cool. Because one day he walks in there, and he's up on the stage, we're all in the big deal, and he's rolling something that looks like silly putty in his hands. And he goes, you guys are going to like this. This is white phosphorus. Watch this. He throws it against the wall. Charlie, what does white phosphorus do when it bangs into something? It explodes.
Hold on.
That explained the black marks on the wall. Another day we walk in, and right down in the front row, he's got these big giant balloons that are floating on strings. They weren't full of helium. No. They had hydrogen, which is almost as light. And he had a yardstick with something on the end. He goes, watch this. And he lights that, and he holds it over by this balloon. Boom! Then he holds it by the next one that's a little bigger. And finally gets to the biggest one. And in that big lecture, it was loud. It was fun. Chemistry, that part of it was fun.
Oh, wow.
The stuff you write down, not so much. But in the area we now call India, they began to put things together and figure, you know what? Everything is made up of some combination of earth, air, fire, and water. Were they far off? Well,
No.
not really in a basic way. Here's the one that I will get you, and you can come up later if you have forgotten. Right here, and those of you on my left, this is an ancient bathtub from this time frame. Also around 2000 BC, in that general time frame, indoor bathroom plumbing was first used in Crete. And I read just a brief part of this. We're not talking about a hole in the ground where they poured water. We're talking about running water and flushing toilets. Somebody asked me, they said, well, what in the world happened? I said, somehow that technology all got lost for a few thousand years and was rediscovered in about the late 1700s, early 1800s. But in about 2000 BC, they had indoor plumbing. Here's the one that ought to get you. There's a picture of that up here. That's why I didn't put it on the screen. And also around 2000 BC, some contradict the state, but still, Stonehenge was being built in England. I honestly thought Stonehenge was not anywhere near that old. I thought it was a much, like, after the time of Christ when it was built. Stonehenge was built closer to the time of Abraham.
Wow.
It is that thing in England where those rocks are piled up in that circle, and they are not sure what the purpose is. We still don't know why they built it. Some think it had to do with burials. Some think it was a time telling mechanism for the season. We don't know. Some think that there was a group of people that used it for weird pagan rituals. We don't know. But it's very old. Around 1991 BC, the oldest form of a novel was written in Egypt. From about 2050 to 1800 BC, the pharaohs in Egypt began to encourage more farming, international trade, literature, art, and architecture. Between 2100 and 1900 BC, also in Crete, the first potter's wheel was introduced. Somebody tell me, what is a potter's wheel? And don't tell me it's a wheel a potter uses.
It's for
It
making.
is.
For making clay pots and
Yes.
stuff.
And what does it do?
It's
spins.
been,
It spins. Why do you want it to spin?
so you can form more.
You can form the clay. Charlie, this one's for you. It is to clay pottery what a blank is to wood.
Chisel.
No.
No.
A lathe. A lathe.
Yeah. True. No,
I have not worked on a lathe since junior high, but I would love the opportunity to do so again. They are so much fun.
Okay, what's a lake?
A lathe is where you put wood, and as it spins, you use chisels to form it. That's how you make table legs, baseball bats, bowls, vases. There's all kinds of cool videos.
Too.
Huh?
That's how you make ball bearings too.
That's a metal lathe. My great uncle, my grandfather's brother, was a welder and metalworker. He had a metal lathe at his house. Never saw it in action, but it was a monstrous piece of
Yeah,
equipment.
they are.
Wow.
The potter's wheel was invented then, and instead of them rolling it out and trying to, all of a sudden now they could get those solid, smooth contours and bases.
That's what Shirley does. You can say something.
Yeah, she uses one, of course hers is more motorized now. Back then it
The
was.
first ones they had to just.
Had to spin them, and then they figured out a way to pump it with their foot and bump it with their leg. It has evolved, and it's gotten better, I guess. 2070 BC, Yu the Great establishes the Xia dynasty. It is the first dynasty in traditional Chinese history. So while this is going on over here in what we call the Promised Land in Canaan, in China, their first great dynasty is taking place. And in 2040 BC, Mentuhotep II, the ruler of the 11th dynasty of Thebes, finally completes the reunification of Egypt. And finally, last three things here. We talked about how Lot's daughters, children, one of their sons became the father of the Moabites, and the other one became the father of the Ammonites. Well, the Moabites, who lived just east of the Dead Sea, and the Ammonites, who occupied the countryside north of Moab, these people opposed Israel later on, and they were eventually destroyed by God by having them and their allies turn on each other. You can read that in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. We mentioned that Abraham lied to King Abimelech. Looked it up. Abimelech was actually a generic name given to all Philistine kings from the time of Abraham to the time of King David. So if your name was Bob and you became the king, they changed your name, you became Abimelech. Now there's also other Abimelechs mentioned in the Bible that have nothing to do with this. There was even some Jewish Hebrew men whose names were Abimelech. It means father, king, or from the father, or something of that nature. But the Philistines gave all of their kings a similar, that same name. See, Pharaoh is not a name, it was a title. Come to find out, calling him King Abimelech was kind of like calling him King. He wasn't just a king, he was a king. King squared, there you go. And the last thing of history from this time frame, again, giving you just a little taste of it. It is believed that the descendants of Ishmael's 12 sons are those people known today as Arabs. It is difficult to separate them from others today due to their centuries of intermarriage with other people groups. His 12 sons did not become a specific great nation, but they intermarried with others, and many of today's Arabs could probably trace their lineage back to one of those 12 sons, and therefore to Ishmael, and then but to Ishmael also then to Abraham. See why we have said, many of us have said for many years, many of the problems in the Middle East, even today, boils down to a family quarrel. Just on a massive scale. Wow. All right, any thoughts, questions, comments?
Did you skip one of the alphabet?
You skipped that one.
Did I skip one? Oh, around 2000, the beginning of the Semitic alphabet. And of course, the Semitic languages are Hebrew, Aramaic, and some of those. So while other ancient civilizations had already developed, they finally developed theirs. Sorry, I missed that. I have an excuse. I was on the trip. No.
Are you tripping?
I have an excuse. I overlooked it as I went down the list.
We're that way tonight.
Again, and I keep repeating this because I want you to understand the purpose. Are you understanding that while you read the Bible, don't get locked into thinking that what you see there is all that was going on in the world. And there is so much more even than what I can give you. I'm giving you little slivers of history that were going on there. There was something going on in places that there might not even be a record of it to this day unless they go and dig and find something there.
They're finding more stuff.
Oh, they're finding stuff all the time. Even in Israel today, they are finding more things that, and I love this. You see the headlines every so often. Archaeology find proves more of the Bible right. I don't agree with that statement. I think that when they find those things and it agrees with the Bible, I think they need to be saying, wow, the Bible has validated my find.
Especially if it didn't.
You know? But keep in mind, God's Word tells us about salvation history. God pursuing man and bringing about His Son for our salvation. But it doesn't tell us all history. But I hope that your understanding is we get a better grip on history itself and where the Bible stories fit into it. It gives us a better understanding of why certain things are done. Why did they do it that way? I mean, let's face it. When the angels came in the form of men to Sodom and Gomorrah and went into Lot's house, and we hear this, we read this, Lot offers to let the men do whatever they want to his daughters. We just freak out over that. But then you gotta go back and understand the culture and the history. I'm not saying it's right, but in that culture, that was all he could do. Everyone in that city would have forgiven him for turning his daughters over to the men of the city to be molested. They would have never forgiven Lot if he had allowed the strangers who were guests under his roof to be molested. We can't, I don't know about you, I don't agree with it, but I have to look at it from the lens of, he didn't live in 21st century Clayton. He lived in a pagan civilization that had a very different set of morals. Okay?
Well, you know, the different ways of people living, the different cultures and stuff, there is a lot of things we disagree with. Especially if they're not in God's place.
Down around where we pastored our first church in Lordsburg, there was a POW camp during World War II. Japanese Americans were held there. I've talked about that with a younger member of my family who just freaks out on it, says that was just so wrong. So wrong. Well, looking back with hindsight, yes, it was wrong. But I said, you have to understand what the thinking in that moment. Japan had just attacked Pearl Harbor. We honestly didn't know, because there were many German and Japanese people living in our nation that were loyal to those countries and to their way of life still, and were working to sabotage America. They didn't know who, so they took the blanket approach and whoosh. Was it right?
No.
By our hindsight, probably not. In the heat of the moment, the question I ask is, what would you have done? That's why when we study the historical setting of the world, as we read through some of these Bible stories, we have to look at it and say, I'm not sure I'd do it that way now, but in the heat of the moment then, what would I have done? It's easy to sit down and criticize Abraham, tell him you're my sister, but the question I have for some of us is, what would we have done in that situation?
Would it be the same idea as, a lot of these generals and all these upper, whatever you call them? Sometimes they gotta make a decision rather to not save somebody, just to save everybody, a lot more people than just one person that they're trying to make a decision.
Sometimes the decision has to be made to save the crowd over the one. So glad I haven't had to make that decision yet. Although, my youngest son had to make a similar decision here a few months ago. Do I run the possibility of totally wrecking my vehicle, or do I hit the young lady and maybe kill her? Sometimes split-second decisions have to be made. You live with the consequences.
My
Right?
brother went through that. My brother went through that, and the police blamed him for it. And he did it to prevent the accident. He ended up on the
Yep.
road. But the police said his fault because he lost control, but he didn't. He didn't want to hurt that person.
There was one decision made that benefited mankind for eternity. And that was the one that Caiaphas even said, better the one to die.
For the benefit of the whole nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's amazing with that is Caiaphas was not truly serving God like he should, and yet he spoke truth. He spoke truth. Because from God the Father's perspective, it was better to sacrifice his son for the sake of the whole world than to lose all of mankind. All right. Debbie, dismiss us in prayer.
We appreciate you and thank you, Father God. Thank you for all the many answered prayers, God. Father, we thank you for this time that we could gather together, Jesus. And Father, we ask that you bless us as we go our separate ways, dear Father. And we pray that your word will just be applied to us, dear Lord, in our hearts, dear God. Father, be with us as we go to the person. In the name of Jesus, we will thank God. Thank you, Father, Jesus.
Amen. Hey, everybody, pray for Sunday services, and we'll see you then. We're going to have a good time.